Well, listen, of course the climate is changing. The climate has been changing from the dawn of time. The climate will change as long as we have a planet Earth.
Sure, the climate is changing. And one of the reasons why the climate is changing is because the climate has always been changing.
Climate is changing, and climate has always changed, and it always will. There's archaeological evidence of that. There's biblical evidence of that.
Anybody who's ever studied any geology knows that over periods of time, long periods of time, the climate changes.
So again, let's pause for a second to note that they now make it seem as if, oh, it's totally natural to just admit that it's always been changing. That is very much not how this process has actually gone down in the past few decades. In like broad terms, they initially said that it's not changing. Then they said, okay, it is changing, but it's not due to us. Eventually, they will transition to it is changing, it is due to us, but it's too expensive to actually do anything about it. And the entire point of all this is to wait just long enough that they can say, yes, it is changing, it is because of us. Oh, dear God, maybe we should have done something, but it's too late now, so what are you gonna do? And all of the oil barons have already been in their graves for 20 or 30 years at that point. That's the arc that we see here. But I do want to talk about the argument that the climate has always been changing. Sure, in some forms, the climate has been changing. Weather also changes, to go back to Lauren Boebert's point about the seasons. That isn't what's happening here, though. And while we can have a debate between climate scientists on the one hand, or right-wing shills for fossil fuels on the other hand, why don't we instead focus on a group that seems to have gotten it right from the very beginning? And that is, of course, the actual fossil fuel companies who understood what was happening, understood that it wasn't natural, and were actually shockingly accurate about the predictions about how this would play out many decades ago. I'll remind you, we've previously talked about this on the show, ExxonMobil made breathtakingly accurate climate predictions way back in the 1970s and the 1980s when no Republican would admit that anything like this was actually happening. Their scientists found and detailed how global heating was human influence. And in fact, they predicted long before I saw it being widely talked about that the carbon budget for holding warming below 2 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial times, they already knew exactly what that was going to be and how we might exceed it. They weren't ignorant of the timeline of the effects either, how this would proceed decade by decade. I want you to take a look at this. This was a slide that was presented to brief representatives of many of the major oil companies. They figured out then that by 2005, we'd have a 1% global average rise, or 1 degree Celsius global average rise that wouldn't necessarily be noticeable. At 2.5 degrees Celsius rise by they estimated 2038, and that is looking pretty accurate at this point, there would be major economic consequences, strong regional consequences as well. And by the time it gets to 2067, there would be globally catastrophic effects. So that is largely the message that these major fossil fuel companies' scientists were telling them internally and briefing others on as the 70s and the 80s and the 90s went by. You'll note, of course, that it doesn't appear that any of the actual leadership, let alone the CEOs of these companies, seemed to give a damn about the fact that this was being revealed to them. It was still full steam ahead, almost literally. And the thing is, they took this knowledge, they hid it, and largely embarked on a public relations campaign to convince people that this isn't anything that you should actually have to worry about. And we are going to show you some of the forms that this came in many, many years ago, but you don't have to go back that far to see that this campaign was still very much in effect. In 2013, for instance, Rex Tillerson, then the chief executive of the oil company, he would eventually ascend to an important role in the Trump administration, said that the climate models were, quote, not competent, and that, quote, there are uncertainties over the impact of burning fossil fuels. Look, a climate model is a climate model. It's not the climate. So it's never going to be 100% accurate. And scientists do agree about some of the specifics about how all of this will play out. But their scientists at Exxon at that point had already been sure for more than 30 years, longer than many of you watching this video have even been alive. He is just flat out lying. But despite that, they spent decades trying to muddy the waters. Take a look at a 1991 PR campaign, Doomsday is Canceled Again. This is from the Informed Citizens for the Environment, which was, of course, not a group of environmentalists. It was a front group of coal and utility companies. So look, in 1991, there wasn't apocalypse. They had this also in 1991. Who told you the earth was warming? Chicken Little. They all knew exactly what was going to happen. all of this is a strategy, a cynical, callous, cruel strategy to buy time, to get more money, to buy everything else. And look, I will end this section by showing that if you still somehow believe that climate change is just natural, over tens of thousands of years, things naturally get hotter or cooler, then why the hell is it, if we could go to graphic 11, that in just the past 60 years, we have seen a massive, unprecedented rise in carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere? Whatever that is, and we can use a lot of terms, I'm gonna say horrific. It certainly isn't natural. Anna, what do you think?
I think that under this system, you're always going to have a problem, a huge problem, with corporations putting their company's profits over the best interests of the entire country, the entire world, even go against their own interests. I mean, when you really think about it, destroying the planet for humans to be able to live in would obviously impact them. It would impact their offspring, their grandchildren. But it is incredible how human nature works, how there's some portion of humans who think that just being tremendously and fabulously wealthy, having more money than you can ever imagine, is more important than sustaining and protecting the environment for humans to live in. Yeah. So what I think continues to be a problem is that our government, we have a system of government that values and protects those profit motives above all else. We are supposed to have a system of government that looks out for the best interests of the people, and we cannot have that as long as the corruption is literally baked into the system in the form of money in politics, yes, but also in the form of members of Congress having the ability to invest in these fossil fuel companies themselves by buying shares of individual stocks. Unless we change that, all of the discussions that we have about this issue will go nowhere. We're saying the right things, we believe the right things, but it's really a fruitless effort unless we change and reform our political system.
Exactly. Yeah, I either outright ban that money specifically, money more broadly, or at least make the politicians terrified to be seen taking that money or moving on to those jobs, 100%. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.